Hey everyone, welcome to the March 26th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragon. I'll be joined in just a moment by my usual co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, the focus is on Florida Derby Day at Gulfstream Park. Saturday, they have 14 races on tap. We're going to focus on the last 5 of those, comprising the late pick 5 sequence, beginning with the Pan American, the grade 2, that is race 10, proceeding through the Gulfstream Park Oaks, that stakes race for the fillies and mares later in the card, and culminating with the Florida Derby, which is race 14 on that 14 race card at Gulfstream Park. Also, later in the podcast, we're going to discuss the Jeff Ruby Stakes at Turfway. That is the other Derby prep this weekend that's offering 100 Derby qualifying points to the winner of that race, taking place on the synthetic track at Turfway. And we're going to start things off before we get to those 2 venues, Gulfstream Park and Turfway, by just mentioning a little bit about the Dubai World Cup card at Meydan over at the United Arab Emirates this weekend. A couple Americans I should say a couple high-profile Americans competing over there in Mystic Guide and the Dubai World Cup, also Channel Maker and the Shima Classic. So we'll talk about those as well as maybe some others that are competing earlier on the card. So Craig, how are you doing on this Friday as we look forward to a weekend of racing?
Good. I'm feeling a little old because it is my youngest daughter's 25th birthday, so that means I'm a whole lot more than 25. But otherwise, looking forward. I'm sure it'll be a good day. I don't mind getting old, actually, just joking around. But yeah, feels good. It's a nice sunny day, and looking forward to a big day of racing tomorrow.
Yeah, happy birthday to her. We were just talking about it before we started. A nice day all around, a really nice day in New York, a nice day where you are in Oklahoma, and hopefully that weather holds around the country for these 2 big race cards at Gulfstream Park and at Turfway. But before we get to those, just want to mention some of the racing that's taking place on Saturday morning over in Dubai, the Dubai World Cup, obviously the feature there. The big story, I think, is, well, 2 things. It's not the toughest Dubai World Cup that we've seen in recent years, or really ever throughout the history of this race, and that just makes the American Mystic Guide way the horse to beat in the race. We had talked about his victory last time out in the slop in the Razorback at Gulfstream, I should say at Oaklawn. It seemed like he had really taken a step forward from his 3-year-old to 4-year-old season, and if he holds that form, he's going to be really tough for this field to handle.
He is. I mean, anytime this race has been run on dirt, it's been dominated by Americans for the most part. I mean, they haven't won every running, but they're always competitive, and I don't really see any standouts with the winner of the Saudi Cup electing to go in one of the turf races. He is definitely the horse to beat. I'm not going to pretend I know a ton about the other horses in here because I don't, but it's good to see horses like Jesus's team and Sleepy Eyes Todd, my buddy, in here. And, I wish him the best. It's not a race that I would imagine I'll be betting, but I'll be tuned in to FS1, which is the channel it's on this year, so everybody can see it. A few years in the past, that hasn't been the case, but good to get our sports getting some national exposure and hope it'll be a great race.
Yeah, I completely agree about those races being televised, and I have no real argument with what you said. Mystic Guide, especially of the Americans, just seems like far and away the classiest of those and the most accomplished. And you know that I've been a fan of this horse from day one, and he's just seems to keep improving with every single start from last winter up until now. So another step forward, and he's going to be way too good for this field to handle. I guess the 1.25 miles is a slight question mark, though. He seemed to get it just fine in the Jockey Club Gold Cup at the end of last year. So second off the layoff, I think that this seems like a spot where he should be able to win. The other big race on the Dubai World Cup card is the one right before the Dubai World Cup. That is the Dubai Shima Classic, going 1.5 miles. That's arguably the toughest of the races on the card because the American Channel Maker is in there, but he probably is not going to be among the favorites because you've actually got the Saudi Cup winner, Mishrif, in there, as well as a top horse from Japan, the mare Chronogenesis, who was a winner of 2 Group 1s there last year, including their Rima Kinnan. So that seems like maybe the toughest race from a class standpoint on the card.
Yeah, it's definitely one I'll be watching as a fan. I'm almost, and I won't be betting this one either, to be upfront, but when I do, I'm always against any American horses in these turf races. But Channel Maker did run really well in the Saudi Cup. That said, I don't think he really is a contender, and double-digit odds will probably be realistic on him. I imagine he'll be up on the lead or very near it and give his backers a run for some time. But I suspect some others will run well. Mishriff is going to be obviously very tough to beat. And my one take out of this race is I'm disappointed he's not in the dirt race because we don't have a lot of great dirt horses right now. And I thought he's got the potential to be one. But I guess his plans for the year are to eventually culminate in the Arc if all goes well. So you can't blame him for trying this spot.
No, I mean, arguably they're tackling the more ambitious spot because this seems like it's a tougher race. There really just is one horse to beat in that Dubai World Cup. I think there are multiple dangerous horses in this Shima Classic, including the Aidan O'Brien charge Mogul, who's coming out of the victory in Hong Kong. He seems like he's stepping forward too as a 4-year-old. So a lot going on in that one. That's one that I'll be watching pretty closely. We're not going to go through all of the undercard races. I will say one horse that I'm looking forward to on the undercard that's listed as a price on the morning line. I think he'll be much shorter than that. Some of these morning lines seem a little out of whack in Dubai, but in the Golden Shaheen, that horse that just won in California, Wildman Jack, seemed like he was establishing himself as a pretty exciting sprinter in this country. So I'm interested to see how he stacks up against this international field in Dubai.
Yeah, I would agree. I think he's got a big shot. Of course, he's going to have to deal with Steve Asmussen's Yalpan in here, who disappointed in the Breeders' Cup, but certainly has some pretty high speed. But I would expect the Americans to do well in here as well, as they usually do in the sprint race.
Yeah, that sprint race seems like it should be dominated by the Americans and the Japanese because those two Japanese horses, Matera Sky and Capano Kicking, they dominated that Saudi Cup about a month ago, and Matera Sky could be a problem for all of the American horses that want to show speed because he is like a quarter horse out of the gate. He's really fast and should lead them early, so we'll see if those Americans can do well on the chase in that spot. Should be fun with the racing action starting very early on Saturday morning, at least to watch these races. Some of you might find some prices you like in these, so good luck if you're betting those Dubai World Cup races. But we're going to focus on this podcast more so on the American side of things with Gulfstream Park on Saturday. We're going to talk about the late pick 5 sequence culminating in that Florida Derby. That begins with race 10, the grade 2 Pan American, going 1.5 miles on the turf course there. And we've got 3 horses that are drawn down towards the inside that figure to take the bulk of the play in this race. We've got the likable older horse, I should say, Sadler's Joy, who's now 8 years old, doesn't win that often, but still is always in the mix. And then from the Mike Maker barn, we've got Cross Border and Temple, both 2 hard-knocking horses that also aren't known for winning that often, but they're always around at the end of these races. Not the toughest grade 2 event that I think we'll see in this division, but a pretty competitive race.
It is, and as always, I'll be curious to hear your take on Sadler's Joy. You know I'm not picking him. I'm sure he'll probably run well, but as you said, he very rarely wins. I don't know if he'll really be the favorite as the morning line has it, but it does look fairly open. As I often do in these cases, I'm going to not really leave my decision, but when it's a close call in a race like this, I'm going to go with whoever Irad Ortiz goes with because he just seems so much better than the rest of the riders. And he always seems to pick the right one in these turf spots. And in this case, he's the longest one on the morning line with Temple. It looks a little odd that he would pick a horse who's coming out of a 4th in the grade 2 Mac D Armada compared to Cross Border, who's also Mike Maker trained and is coming out of a 3rd place finish in the much bigger purse Pegasus. But that kind of tells me a lot that he thinks Temple is the bigger horse. I'm assuming he had the pick. Maybe he didn't. But even if he didn't have his choice, I still just think he is the better rider. The one horse among those 3 that I think does have a big shot in here that's not among those 3 is Moon Over Miami. I was actually really impressed with his run in the Mac D Armada. He took a big jump forward in the speed figure department, as you like to see from a 4-year-old in his first start after turning 4. He hadn't run those kind of speed figures, even though he had a solid enough 3-year-old campaign. It was nothing spectacular, but he just looked like he took a big jump to me for Bill Mott. I think the extra distance could help. So of the others outside those 3, he's the one I'd be interested in. And maybe if he drifts up from that 5-1 would be worth a bet in here.
Well, I agree with you about one thing with regard to Sadler's Joy, and that he's probably not going to be the favorite in here. I feel like that honor will probably go to one of the 2 Mike Maker runners, perhaps Cross Border on the inside. We'll see if Irad Ortiz being on Temple makes the public go in that direction. I could see that happening as well. But Sadler's Joy, I mean, they didn't go for him in the McKnight last time, so he was 4th in that race behind Temple. I'm not sure why he's supposed to be a shorter price in this race. Sadler's Joy, I mean, what can you say at this point? He's a classy horse. He always shows up, doesn't often get there. When he does, I mean, it's by a very narrow margin, and things often go right for him with regard to the trip. And being a deep closer that he is, that doesn't always happen. I will say the fact that there's only 8 runners in this field, I think that's a little better for him than the 11 runner fields that he's faced in his last 2 starts, where he can get really far behind and traffic is more of an issue. So I'm hoping that Jose Ortiz can wind him up a little bit earlier with just 7 rivals to pass, because he is likely to be last in the early going. I can't bring myself to pick him on top here because I just wish he had run a little better last time in the McKnight. I thought he had an excuse when his run was just mistimed too back in the Red Smith, but I feel like the McKnight performance should have been a little bit stronger for him off the layoff. So I'll use him, but I had to go somewhere else for my top selection. I'm not going to land on either of the Mike Maker horses. Of the 2, I do prefer Cross Border because I think his recent form is just pretty strong. His Pegasus last time was fine behind Colonel Liam, and he's a horse who has been going shorter in some recent starts, but he certainly handled route distances in the past and was right there with Sadler's Joy and the Bowling Green and also the Sword Dancer last year. So I think he's proven his class going these longer distances. He just has to work out the right trip. There is not much pace in this race, so I'm interested to see how both of these Mike Maker horses are ridden, because they do each have some tactical speed, and Cross Borders even set the pace in some prior starts, so I wonder what the tactics will be with those 2. The one that I'm kind of against of the short price is actually the one that you landed on, and that would be Temple. I just haven't loved either of Temple's performances stretching out in distance. For me, he feels like one of these Mike Maker horses that hasn't really stepped forward that much since they've tried the marathons. I thought he got a pretty good trip too back in the McKnight and had his chance to get by Tide of the Sea, was just turned away by that one. And his performance last time in the McDarmida, I thought was a real negative for me, because he got a perfect trip from Irad Ortiz that day and just had nothing in the stretch. He got there, looked like he was about 2-5 to win the race at the 8th pole, and just didn't finish off the last furlong. So that bothers me a little bit, especially stretching back out to the 1.5 miles. So I wanted to go somewhere else. Got no problem with Moon Over Miami, who you mentioned. I think he's a contender here, but I wanted to get a little more creative with the number 8 horse Churn and Burn, who's actually moving up in class and facing stakes company for the first time. Just feel like this crew is almost crying out for a new face, kind of like it was in that McDarmida last time, where Phantom Currency wired the field coming out of some optional claiming races. And I think Churn and Bird might be able to do something similar here for Ian Wilkes, because there's really no speed in this race aside from perhaps Cross Border if they decide to go back to that old running style. And I would imagine that Julian Leperoux is going to take it to this field and send Churn and Burn to the top here. And that seems like it could make him dangerous, because he stretched out to 1.5 miles for the first time last time out against an optional claiming field that wasn't inferior to this, but he was a dominant winner that day by nearly 4 lengths. And the pace might not look like it was that quick on paper, and there are no pace figures in the TimeformUS PPs, but if you watch the replay of that race, the leader went out and opened up a margin on Churn and Burn. Then it was like 6 or 8 lengths back to the rest of the field after Churn and Burn. So he was in that uncomfortable position, chasing a runoff leader the entire way, took over from that horse who finished nowhere, and just kicked clear from all of the closers at the end of that race. I think that was a really strong performance and kind of signaled to me that maybe this is one that has really improved going marathon distances. So he's going to be my long shot pick in this race.
Yeah, I've got no problem with that pick at all. I do want to mention the figures. The 1.5 mile races, for some reason at Gulfstream, they weren't reporting the 1.25 mile time, so you couldn't get their finishing quarter. But that is something I'll take a little personal pride in. I finally warned them down, and they're making sure that time finds its way to the charts and the data feed. So why it wasn't happening back in February when I did figures for that race, you will see figures for all the races going forward at that distance at Gulfstream.
Well, that's good information, because there's really no split that's more important in turf racing than that final 1/4 mile split. So it's good to have those, especially in the longer races. Moving on to the second leg of this pick 5 sequence at Gulfstream Park, staying on the turf, but going to the 3-year-old division with the Cutler Bay. This race is a mile, and we've got a horse who's only listed at 5-2 on the morning line in the number 6 annex, but I would imagine this horse is going to be closer to 2-5 than 5-2. He seems like he's going to be a prohibitive favorite in this race. He's undefeated. He's looked good in both career starts. He's already beaten some of these rivals. He just seems like way the horse to beat, right?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, some could argue that he had an absolutely perfect trip last time where there was just an insane pace being set. We had the pace figures as high as in the 170s at the half mile mark, but I don't think it really mattered. I think we just had a runoff in there that caused that. He kind of ignored him. Got a 105 TimeformUS pace figure for his win, and yeah, I think he's way the horse to beat. I mean, all you have to do is look at the second choice in this race, which is the one Hyper Focus. And in this case, I don't like Irad's horse at all. I mean, he won his allowance race last time, first time on turf, but he didn't get much of a speed figure doing it. He only got a 94. I guess you could argue the race maybe is a little stronger because the fourth place finisher came back to win, but I think the race was rated just fine because there's several others that have run back in the field that have not run well. I think it was just a case of that fourth place finisher running a much better race next time. So I think he's way the horse to beat. If I have to make a top pick in here, I would make it him. I'm certainly not going to bet him because, as you said, he's not going to be anywhere near that 2 to 5 price. But I couldn't really come up with a logical alternative to get too excited about.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I was looking for somebody to use against him, but I just feel like Annex might be pretty good. He's even been a little bit green in his races, and he's still been able to pull out a couple of victories. And the horse that was his main rival last time, Scarlet Sky, I guess they're waiting to point to a different spot, but he would have been the main rival in this spot as well because they both ran well last time, but he's not back in here. And it just seems like this is a slightly easier field for Annex, so I think he's supposed to get it done. I mean, I think the two other interesting horses are, one of them is the number 5 King of Dreams for Wanavia because he does have speed, and I think the pace scenario in this race is a little bit murky. We've got some horses with tactical speed on the inside, like Fighting Force and perhaps What Makes Sammy Run, but King of Dreams seems like one that will get sent to the front here, and we'll just see how far he can take them. His one turf start was good, and that's come back as a pretty strong maiden race. They took a shot in the Tampa Bay Derby last time, but I think he's getting back on the right surface here, so I think maybe from the front end, he's the biggest threat to Annex. And the other horse that is a bit of a wild card coming back off the layoff is the number 8 Step Dancer for Barclay Tagg. He looked pretty good winning the Awad last year at Belmont. He did that over a pretty yielding course. The final time was a very slow 1:48 for a mile and a 16th. So that was a course that had a lot of give in it. So we'll see if he can be as effective over a firm turf course. But those look like the two most likely upsetters if there were any.
Yeah, Step Dancer was the one horse I wanted to make a case for. I don't really have any problem with him. He hasn't raced since October. As a 2-year-old, he ran a 94 speed figure that day. And as you mentioned, it was a really yielding course. We have it rated only a 5 on our 1 to 10 scale, which is pretty far down there. It means it might have been soft even more than yielding. So I'm not going to hold that against him. But I just couldn't make the leap to him beating Annex in here. So no issue with Step Dancer. King of Dreams is one to keep an eye on because he does have that speed, as you say. I did look this race up on the Gulfstream site. It's just to see what the run-up's going to be because it can often vary quite a bit. But it's a pretty normal run-up for this race, only 41 feet. So it's not like one of those where it's listed as a mile, but it's really a mile and a 16th, which can be detrimental to a front runner. But in this case, I don't think it is. It's just kind of a normal mile race, and I think you covered the horses I would use if I'm playing a pick 5. You didn't mention Hyper Focus, or are you as down on him as I am? Not really down on him, but just think he's probably way too low on that morning line.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really have much to add about him. I kind of agreed with everything you said about him. I didn't get why he was necessarily a short price in this race. I think he's coming out of a pretty weak allowance race, and he'd just have to run a lot faster to be competitive with these. So I much preferred the two other alternatives that I mentioned, King of Dreams and Step Dancer, to him. Moving on to the 12th race, the middle leg of this late pick 5 sequence, and it is a prep for the Kentucky Oaks, the Gulfstream Park Oaks, a grade 2 event, going a mile and a 16th with that short stretch run at Gulfstream. And we lost a major player in this race that was supposed to be entered. That was Malathot for Todd Pletcher. I know with the head of Shadwell Stables, Sheikh Hamdan, passing away this week, maybe that had to do with why she wasn't entered. But hopefully she's okay, and we'll see her in one of the subsequent preps. But with her absence, it really takes away from the quality of this field. And Todd Pletcher does have another runner in here in the number 1, Combe Lima. We'll talk about her in a little bit, especially with regard to the pace. But really, none of the major players in the 3-year-old filly division are in this race.
Yeah, my notes, my first note is, to be frank, this field stinks. I mean, let's be honest. This is not just looking at the speed figures, looking at the quality of wins that the horses have coming in. It's just not much of a prep race. But that said, I guess somebody's got to win, and they're going to get a trip to the Kentucky Oaks because of it, and maybe even the second place finisher, because this is one of those 100-point races. So for me, the race is pretty simple. It just comes down to Cone Lima, who looks to be really clear on the lead and a distance at a track where it's a huge advantage. There's basically no other speed that I can see in here at all that can match hers. She's run okay on dirt before. It's not like she's just trying, moving from turf to dirt. And she's been really good on turf. Had a tough trip last time and wound up getting put up. But I thought she was fine, and I just think she's going to be really tough to beat. I don't think we'll get anywhere near that 3-1. I guess the other horses you have to consider are Crazy Beautiful, who won a big one at Alcibiades as Alcibiades as a 2-year-old, competed in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies and ran okay, basically splitting no, the heck, there was only 7 horses, so ran near the back, so maybe that wasn't as good as looked. Her comeback wasn't very good. She only got a 90 speed figure despite running second, the whole Bodemeister, so I can't get excited about her as the favorite. And then you look at the third choice is Millefoy, who we've talked about a few times on here, and I'll admit she had a bit of a tough trip when she got shuffled back, but she just had no real run after that, so I can't be excited about her at a short choice either. So for me, this race is all about Cone Lima.
Well, I'm glad we have a disagreement here because I have a completely different take on this race. I don't like Cone Lima at all. I was not a fan of her dirt races early in her career. I thought she was facing some pretty weak company in those. She was, no match for Simply Ravishing last summer at Saratoga in that PG Johnson, and Simply Ravishing arguably improved out of that race. I think Cone Lima really came to hand on the turf, and Todd Pletcher is just kind of taking advantage of a really soft spot to take a shot here on the dirt. But I looked up the stats in Formulator, and this is just not something you want to rely on Todd Pletcher to do. Over the past 5 years, going turf to dirt in graded stakes races, Tom Pletcher's 0 for 20, and of those 20 runners, just 2 of them hit the board, and they were third. So he's 0 for 20 even hitting the exacta, going turf to dirt in graded stakes races. This is just not something that he ever does well, and I'm just not a fan of this horse on the main track. Maybe she has a huge pace advantage, and that's going to allow her to win over a Gulfstream Park course that can sometimes be a little bit speed favoring, but I feel like she's going to have a pretty big advantage to beat this field because I think there are a couple of horses that are okay in here. One of them is Crazy Beautiful, who I don't really have anything clever to say about. She ran fine last time in the Devona Dale. Not sure where the winner's performance came from, whole Bodemeister, who was a big price in there. But, Crazy Beautiful was one of the only logical horses to show up with a competitive effort that day. And her 2-year-old form backs it up. So I guess she has a right to take a step forward second off the layoff. But the horse that I really, really like in here is the number 6 Millefoy, who I think we can dismiss the Devona Dale. I wouldn't downplay the trouble that she had last time too much because I think it was really significant. She was traveling well on the backstretch, and Jean Velasquez just seemed like he got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he rode her right into the back of a horse that was stopping, a long shot on the far turn, and she was robbed of all her momentum. And on that Gulfstream Park main track, you cannot get stopped the way that she did and then be expected to finish a race, especially when it seemed like kickback was a real issue, which it did in the Devona Dale. So I'm willing to just draw a line through that performance and give her a pass because she was training really well coming into that race. It looks like she's trained well coming out of it, and I have to believe she's a lot better than her performance there. And she was good last year in the Demoiselle as well as in her maiden win. I think that Millefoy is the best horse in this race, and I think she's going to get the right trip this time, stalking outside of Cone Lima. And in my opinion, she's just supposed to rebound here. And if she's the third choice, I think that's excellent value on her.
Yeah, I didn't mean to downplay her trip. It was obviously very bad, and I do think Johnny just kind of gave up at that point because there wasn't a whole lot he could do. I would have liked to seen a little more finish. But if you put a line through that race, she certainly fits in here. I looked up the same stat you did about Todd Pletcher. I just think this field is so weak that I kind of overlooked it, but it's certainly something to keep in mind. 0 for 40 basically in the exacta is not a good thing, but I do look, and she ran some 90s on the dirt last time, as a 2-year-old, so it looks to me like she could easily match her turf figures and win, but I won't be surprised if she doesn't. If she's 7-5 in here, I'm not betting her. But if she's near that morning line, I'm going to stick with it.
Moving on to the penultimate race in this Pick 5 sequence, that's race 13. It is the Grade 3 Orchid going 1 3/8 on the turf for the fillies and mares. And this is, I think, one of the more interesting races from a handicapping standpoint in this sequence, though you do have a clear favorite in the number 9, Always Shopping. And I have to say, I've kind of come around on this filly. I was not a big fan of hers when she first started stretching out in distance this winter for Todd Pletcher, but her last 2 races, you really can't dispute. They've been strong, and she just seems like a deserving favorite in this spot. And I think it's a discussion whether or not you think anybody else can get close to her this time, because there are many alternatives that are interesting in this race. But I do acknowledge that she is way the horse to beat.
Yeah, she's the horse to beat. It's a big 10 horse field. I mean, not super huge, but a solid field size. No flag on the pace projector. And just looking at it, she draws the 9 hole, but it looks like looking at that pace projector that she's going to get another great trip. And I say that because she's a horse with tactical speed that tends to often make a great trip. That said, I still don't love her. I mean, I don't think she's a horse I'd want to single in here, so I am going to look to a couple other, well, actually just one other for me. I thought the first logical option would be the shipper from England, Sorrel, coming in for the Clement barn. But when I looked him up, it's just not a strong point with him at all. The ROI on his shippers from Europe or foreign shippers is just 88 cents on the $2 bet. He wins it only about 2%. So that's really hard for me to get excited about. Plus, one of the other things I always used to look for with these European shippers was to make sure they were getting LASIX. Obviously, with the rules nowadays, they can't, but you have to wonder because a lot of these shippers came over because they needed LASIX, and it may change the way we look at these shippers for a while. So that said, the other horse I kind of landed on was the 1 horse Warlike Goddess. She's a lately raced horse for Bill Mott. She won her first 2 starts, including her second at 1 3/8 at Churchill, something you don't see very often. And I thought her race was actually better than it looks last time at Gulfstream when she lost to Antoinette. That one had everything her own way up front. Warlike Goddess still ran a 1:16 TimeformUS speed figure. She's getting more distance today, and I think she's going to be overlooked. So from a betting perspective, I'm going to make her my top pick because I think she's going to offer some real value in here.
Yeah, we have a pretty similar take on this one. I would focus also on the same 3 horses that you mentioned. I mean, Always Shopping, I don't have a whole lot to add to what I said at the top. She's just run really well in her last 2 starts. She figures to get another good trip in this race. The distance is clearly no problem for her. She's going to be a pretty short price. I think she'll probably go off closer to even money, but she does seem like the most likely winner of this race. And I think the 2 horses that you mentioned are the 2 most interesting alternatives. I would be a little more confident, I think, on the number 5 Sorrel. I like her races in Europe. I watched her last at Lingfield over the synthetic course, and she was a nice winner of that race. And reading the comments in the TimeformUS PPs, those Timeform comments, they're pretty bullish on the fact that they expect her to take another step forward. And if she does, she definitely is in the mix in this race. Christophe Clement admittedly does not have the strongest numbers with foreign shippers, but this seems like one that could do okay. And she certainly will have no trouble handling the distance based on her last couple of races in Europe. So I think she's interesting here. And the other horse that I would use is the same one that you said you like on top of that. That's the number 1 Warlike Goddess. This is arguably a deeper field than the one she faced last time in the very one. But she ran okay that day because like you were getting at, the pace was pretty much held together and she was closing into it. That was just her first race off a layoff, and now she's second off, so she's got a right to step forward. I'm still not quite sure where she fits here from a quality standpoint because she does have some things to prove against top-level company, but she is one of the more interesting alternatives given the upside that she has as opposed to some others who just seem like we've already seen their best. So I would look mostly towards those 2, Warlike Goddess and Sorrel, as the 2 alternatives to use in this pick 5 sequence.
Yeah, and I did want to mention with Sorrel, I mentioned the LASIX thing. She clearly is a horse that doesn't look like she needs LASIX because she's coming in on a 3-weight race winning streak and a good effort before that. So normally the ones who have been bleeding overseas don't have very fancy looking running lines coming in. So it's probably much less of a concern with her.
Yeah, and she's campaigned and owned and bred by George Strawbridge, who was an owner who's known to sometimes make that move from Europe to the United States. So I don't think it's anything weird. Maybe they're just thinking that this could turn out to be the right kind of campaign for her. Maybe it's a firm turf thing because she has handled synthetic tracks over there as well. So we'll see. Again, I wouldn't want to take any kind of short price on her because Christophe Clement does not have good numbers with this move. But if she's going to be in that 5 to 6 to 1 range, I think she's somewhat interesting. We'll close things out on this Florida Derby card with the final leg of this Pick 5 sequence, and that is that Kentucky Derby prep race, the Grade 1 Florida Derby. 100 Derby qualifying points on the line for the winner of this race. The 3-year-olds are stretching out to go the 1.125 distance with that full stretch run at Gulfstream Park, and the clear favorite in here, no surprise, is Greatest Honor, who is the winner of both preps for this, the Holy Bull and the Fountain of Youth. He's considered to be one of the top contenders for the Kentucky Derby right now. Just has to pass this final test to solidify himself as one of the favorites for that race, though I think he's facing the toughest field that he's bet in any of these stakes races at Gulfstream Park so far this winter. And while the general assumption is that he's going to improve going this 1.125 distance, I'm not sure he's going to get as favorable a pace setup as he has in his last couple of starts.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised. I remember seeing your tweet when the PPs first came out about the pace scenario. I hadn't looked yet. And I was thinking, man, there's got to be a few horses maybe we're missing, have some cloudy form, but I really don't see it when I look through the PPs. It just doesn't look like there's a whole bunch of pace in here. I have no doubt imagining Collaborate's going to go for the lead. He probably will get it. Maybe Spielberg will try a little bit, but I don't think it sets up very well for the favorite Greatest Honor. And while he hasn't had races where he had red fractions his last couple times out, the pace was still really solid. Both in the Holy Bull and the Fountain of Youth, the pace figures were in the high 120s or low 130s early on. So he definitely had some pace to run into where he may not get that this time. So while I still think he is, I guess, the most likely winner, I don't think it's clear cut. I do think there are some others that could give him a run in here. And the horse I think is most dangerous is Spielberg. It's kind of a weird placement for Bob Baffert to ship in. He's never, I don't think, run a horse in the Florida Derby before. I'm sure he's run some horses at Gulfstream. He may have even won a Breeders' Cup race, but definitely not the Florida Derby. It's usually not one that's on his radar. But I think Spielberg is interesting. For one, by today's standards, he's been a virtual war horse as he's raced without a break. He's making his 9th start already, 4th start of the year, I believe it is, or maybe 3rd. But he just runs all the time, and he always seems to run okay. I thought his trip was interesting in the Southwest last time. He didn't break very well. He usually shows more early speed, and from this post, I expect that's what's going to happen. We all know the Baffert game plan. I would think he's going to use speed to try to get out there, get up next to the 9-horse early. And I think he's really dangerous in here. I guess I'll make him my top pick. If I had to consider another horse in here, it would be the 5 Known Agenda. He's a horse we talked about in the Sam Davis. Didn't run particularly well that day. We talked about his allowance race when he came back and just absolutely romped in a 1 mile and an eighth race, I believe it was, at Gulfstream. Same distance as this one, where he won by basically a football field. And whatever happened in Tampa, he seemed to put it aside because he looked really good that day. He got a 108 speed figure from us, which is competitive with the 2 I've already mentioned. And frankly, I think the race comes down to those 3. I can't really see going in any other direction. It would be a total shock to me if any of those were to win. Some people may have some concerns about the Lasix with Known Agenda. His 1 stinker was in the Sam Davis where he didn't get it. But I'm not too worried about that because he was actually running on at the end. Usually when horses bleed during a race, they tend to not finish the race and are backing up through the field. So I don't really think that's the issue with him. And I guess I'd wrap it up by saying, sure, Greatest Honor can win, but as gamblers, I think he's worth taking a shot against. Given the pace scenario, given the lack of any real advantage in the speed figure department, I'm going to try to beat him and spread in the pick 5.
Yeah, I have a few things to say about this race. I guess I'll start by briefly throwing it back to you because with the pace of this race, I guess the one comment I have about it is there's one horse in this race that the pace projector might not be capturing accurately, and that's the number 8, Soup and Sandwich. I think he's going to be a lot more forwardly placed than what we show on the pace projector. And the reason why he's shown so far back is because he's coming out of a 3-horse race at Tampa Bay Downs where he was last in a 3-horse field early. So, and it was also, aside from that, it was a very slow paced race. So that's why his early pace rating is so far down, but he ran much faster fractions in his first start sprinting, so he clearly has the speed to be much closer to the front end, but I still don't think his presence up close to the pace is going to be enough to make this a quick pace up front. I mean, you look at the 3 horses that are shown in behind Collaborate early, they're Nova Rags, Spielberg, and Papatu, and none of them are speed horses. I mean, at best, Spielberg is a stalker, so I feel like Collaborate's going to be alone up front, and I do kind of want to get your take on Collaborate, Craig, because he figures to get the perfect setup in this race. I'm not sure if he's good enough myself, but I am a little bit scared of this horse getting loose.
Yeah, it could. I mean, I guess I'm just worried that he's not good enough. I mean, normally I kind of like horses like this that are shown loose on the lead, but his 102 speed figure that day scares me. Normally when horses win races like that, that's when they run their fastest. I can't remember who the horse was we talked about a couple last week or the week before that had a similar thing with a romping win. And I said I was just scared of him because he hadn't run fast given those scenarios. And he didn't run very well. And I kind of feel the same way here. If Collaborate was capable of a big figure, it's hard for me to think he wouldn't have run it that day. He only ran a 107 final time speed figure, so while I think he'll be loose, I think there will be some competition that's going to challenge him sooner rather than later, probably somewhere on the back stretch, and he's just not for me. I can see why people would bet him. Our pace projector certainly likes him. We have him picked second in the power picks because of that advantage, but I'm always leery of runoff winners that just don't run that fast.
Yeah, he's not my top pick in this race either, but I am afraid of him given the likely trip that he's going to pull and the fact that he does look to me like a horse that's not going to struggle with the 1.125 distance. I know he's a son of Into Mischief, but there's real stamina breeding on the dam side, and he's this big strapping colt who just looks like a 1.125 might be good for him. So I'm not going to be surprised when he runs well. I just have the same concern as you that he should have run a little faster last time. So I wanted to look in a different direction. I'm a fan of Greatest Honor. I just feel like this is probably the right time to take a shot against him if there is a time, because it's not like he needs to win this race to make it to the Kentucky Derby as a contender. Shook is probably just looking to get another good effort out of him. And I was a little bit concerned about what we saw from him last time, where he was really not running around the far turn. He was inside of horses, and it wasn't until Jose Ortiz steered him to the far outside and got him going at the quarter pole that he was able to close that field down. He did win geared down at the end, but let's be honest. I mean, Drain the Clock and Papatu, they're not among the best 3-year-olds out there. So, I mean, he was supposed to beat those horses handily. And I'm just a little bit concerned that Greatest Honor really takes a while to get going. And if this pace is slow, I just feel like he could be a little behind the 8 ball the entire way. So at a short price, I just wanted to look elsewhere. And I'm not as big a fan of Spielberg as you are. I just never have been. I completely agree that his last speed figure puts him in the mix here and makes him good enough to potentially upset the field. I just couldn't put him on top. He's just not really for me. So I ended up on Known Agenda. For a lot of the reasons that you pointed out, Craig, I feel like the Sam F. Davis wasn't a true read on his ability. I mean, let's remember, going 1.125 miles at the end of his 2-year-old season, he beat Greatest Honor fair and square in that maiden race at Aqueduct, and you could say the Greatest Honor has really stepped forward since then. Known Agenda hasn't, but I feel like if you draw a line through that race at Tampa, Known Agenda has stepped forward as well, and that last allowance victory at Gulfstream Park where he won off by 11, I mean, he was geared down at the end of that race. I don't care who he was beating because they weren't in the same class as he was, but he just looks like a horse that loves this 1.125 miles distance, might even want to go farther in the future, and he's got a little more tactical speed than Greatest Honor, so I'm hoping Irad Ortiz can have him closer, especially with the blinkers added as they were last time. I feel like the horse might be a little bit more willing to be close to the pace under Irad, and just hoping he gets the jump on Jose and Greatest Honor.
Yeah, no problem with that pick. And given the odds, he may very well be the one I wind up on. I did want to address before we move on to Turfway Park, Soup and Sandwich a little bit on the pace projector. I do agree he showed a lot more speed the first time out than he did the second. But I do wonder when you see a horse like him who was 1-5 kind of dragged off a really slow pace, if that doesn't tell you that's how the connections want him to run, and maybe he's not going to be sent in a race like this, I think he should be closer up than what he's shown. I think we have him back in seventh or eighth, something like that. But it looks like to me with those tactics that it was intentional and they don't want him up front. And that's part of why we don't just use how fast horses run. We also use their position early, because oftentimes that'll signal the intentions of the connections.
Let's close things out on this TimeformUS forecast by talking about the one other major Derby prep taking place in the United States this weekend. That is the Jeff Ruby Stakes, a Grade 3 event on Saturday at Turfway Park, race 11 on their 12 race card. This one's going 1.1 miles over the new Tapeta surface at Turfway. And I think the fact that this is a synthetic race, it really throws a monkey wrench into things, because a lot of horses, either they're Tapeta specialists having competed at Turfway all winter, or they're trying the surface for the first time. And that leaves a lot of questions to be answered. The likely favorite in this race is the number 7 Tarantino. And I don't know about you, Craig. I acknowledge that this horse comes in with the best form, but I just am always hesitant to take a horse at a short price trying synthetic for the first time.
Yeah, I am as well, for sure. And I'm not going to pretend to be some synthetic surface guru, because I'm far from it. I do tend to play Woodbine quite a bit when they're running, but the horses basically stay there, and they all have a lot of running lines on synthetic surfaces, so it's not as tough. That said, I'm going to be up front and admit that I cheated, and I listened to your race preview for this one. I would recommend that others watch it. But that said, I landed on a horse that you didn't even mention, so I'll be curious to hear your take on him. This is a race that we predict the pace is going to be fast, and for me, it's really hard to argue with that. There's plenty of speed in here. I think it'll be pretty quick and pretty contested, so at the very least, I don't think anyone's stealing this race. I'll get to the horse I landed on, and that was a horse on the inside, the horse, one horse like the King. He's a horse I thought actually ran very well. He was close to that fast pace in the Battaglia Memorial. He kind of got up right near the lead and faded a bit towards the end, but I thought it was a good race from him. I like that he handled the surface, and I think given the post he has and the amount of speed that's signed on, that he's almost assured a good trip in here, barring just getting hemmed in somehow, but that usually doesn't happen when the field strings out a little bit, and I expect a big effort from him. So when I saw 6-1 on the morning line and looked at the rest of the field, I think we'll get every bit of that, and I think he offers some value.
Yeah, I think you do have to have an opinion about that John Battaglia to have an opinion in this race, because 4 of the major contenders are coming out of there, including the second choice on the morning line, Hush of a Storm. Yeah, I didn't mention like the King in that preview I did for the TimeformUS Road to the Derby series, which you can find on Daily Racing Form's YouTube channel, just because there are so many horses to discuss coming out of the John Battaglia, and he kind of just got left on the cutting room floor. But I thought he ran fine to be second in there. I would say that I prefer the performances of Hush of a Storm and Gretzky the Great just a little bit. Gretzky the Great was setting that fast pace and just barely lost to like the King in a photo for second, despite the fact that they both sustained a few bumps through the stretch as Hush of a Storm is drifting in quite considerably in the late stages. They left Hush of a Storm up after an inquiry in that race, but he did probably get the best trip of them, closing on the outside. That said, Hush of a Storm feels like a horse that is not going to mind the stretch out to 1 1/8 distance, where I suppose that's a bit of a question for Like the King, as well as perhaps Gretzky the Great as well. So I would use all 3 of those horses in some respect. The horse that I was maybe a little bit against coming out of that John Battaglia is Hard Rye Guy, who I thought had some fake trouble at the end of that race, and that he was steady trying to come up the rail as Hush of a Storm drifted in. He had to alter course, but he was getting a really good trip up until that point, saving ground, closing into a fast pace. So I just feel like maybe he was a little bit of a trap in here, and I preferred some of the other horses who were more successful in the John Battaglia. But ultimately, I wanted to look for some bigger prices, and while I'm not in love with the idea of taking horses trying synth for the first time, if I'm going to do it, I want to do it with some horses that are going to be big prices. I'll get right into the horses that I picked in this race. There were 2 of them that are long shots that interested me. One of them is the number 8 Moonlight Strike for Saffie Joseph. Saffie Joseph has, I believe, is it 2 or 3 horses entered in this race? A couple of them. This is the one that I definitely prefer more, though, because he ran fine in the Tampa Bay Derby last time. I don't think that was the strongest prep in the world, but at least he took a step forward from a speed figure standpoint there. And I'm intrigued by him getting on the synthetic track because he actually has quite a turf pedigree on the dam side. Liam's Map is a sire that can get turf runners. And on the bottom side, his dam was best on the turf. I mean, she was a maiden throughout her career, but she ran her best speed figures on the turf. And she herself is a half-sister to a stakes-placed runner on the turf. So I just get the sense that this one might have multi-surface ability, and he seems to be heading in the right direction. So if he's a price in this race, I'll use him. But the horse that I was most interested in at a bigger price is the number 11 Dynamite for Keith DeSormo, coming in from the fairgrounds. He's another horse who has never tried synthetic before, but he's run well on both turf and dirt in the past. And his last couple of performances on the turf at Sam Houston and the fairgrounds, I think have been pretty strong. That race at Sam Houston 2-back, he was really game to just lose by a neck in a 3-horse photo finish. And last time out in the Black Gold at the fairgrounds, he ran a competitive 104 TimeformUS speed figure, took that race over at the top of the stretch, stalking what seemed to be an honest pace for the level. And it looked like the winner was going to blow by him late, but he battled back pretty gamely in the late stages and just seems like a horse that has a lot of fight in him. He's slowly but surely figuring things out. And Keith DeSormo was a trainer that does run some horses up north at Golden Gate on that Tapeta surface. So maybe he's got some gauge on what horses can handle it. So I just feel like this might be a sleeper in the race that could get a little overlooked.
Yeah, I've got no problem with him. And I do want to mention, I like that he has some dirt form. I think a lot of people in these synth races tend to gravitate towards turf horses when they don't have form. And I want to apologize in advance to whoever wrote the book for DRF Press about the synthetic surfaces that I read a long time ago. But one of the things that really stuck out to me was horses that had dirt form do a lot better than those that don't. The horses who just have turf form don't really seem to transfer it. So just something to keep in mind when you look at these races, because we're only handicapping the Jeff Ruby Stakes, but it's a really good card full of big fields. So if you're into synthetic racing, I'm going to be watching at least and looking to play some prices. I don't ever play short prices on synthetics ever. The winning mutual is usually higher. They're usually just more wide open races. So that's just what works for me when I do play them. But you know, that's a good point you make about him. Just wanted to point out the dirt form. Gretzky the Great, I have no problem with him in here. I think he's a really solid horse. I just worry that he's going to kind of get the same thing he had last time where he goes too fast early. Just can't quite finish it up. He looks like a horse to me who's going to be really dangerous when it gets to be Queen's Plate time. It might be best for him if he doesn't make it to the Kentucky Derby and kind of has those alternate plans as an Ontario bred. But I do think he is a horse with some quality that we'll be hearing from. I just think this is a really tough spot from that post.
And just to wrap it up, I would say we both pretty readily dismiss Tarantino, but I mean, he does have things going for him. As you said, he's run well on dirt as well as turf, so synthetic seems like it could be in his wheelhouse. He goes out for Rodolphe Brisset, who has good numbers on synthetic tracks. I mean, there are things to like about him. It's just a value thing, not wanting to take a short price on a horse like this.
Right. And as I mentioned, especially on synthetics, I think that's twofold. It's just different, particularly Turfway. I mean, Turfway has a lot of big prices, so I'm always leery to take a short price, and Tarantino's no different. It won't shock me if he wins, but we mentioned that Florida Derby, or Fountain of Youth, when we were discussing the Florida Derby. He didn't run particularly well in there. He got a 109 speed figure that day, but it just didn't look like the kind of run that's going to transfer very well to synthetics because he just didn't finish off the race.
Well, some really interesting races this weekend, a lot to handicap, a lot to look forward to watching on Saturday, right from the morning up until basically sundown when they run the Florida Derby at Gulfstream Park. So plenty of racing action on tap. I know I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully they give out some good ideas on this podcast. But regardless of whether we're right or wrong, we will recap these races when we do the TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday. So looking forward to that. And we'll also talk about those races taking place in Dubai when we do that look back on the Pacecast next Tuesday. Remember, you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and make sure to tune in for that TimeformUS Pacecast next Tuesday.